Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to today's presentation on population and pastoralism. We'll explore the fascinating historical interplay of three key ways of life. On this first slide, you'll see the title, Population and Pastoralism, a historical interplay of three ways of life. We'll look at hunting and gathering, pastoralism, and agriculture. Over the next slides, we'll examine how these lifestyles have shaped human history. So, let's get started and dive into this intriguing topic. So, let's talk about how a way of life can really influence population. The activities people engage in for their livelihood have a direct impact on how quickly populations grow or decline. For example, back in early times, when people depended mainly on hunting and gathering, the population growth rate was relatively low. This is because hunting and gathering require a lot of effort, and food sources can be unpredictable, which limits population growth. Now, when societies shifted towards agriculture, things changed quite a bit. Agriculture allowed for a more stable food supply, which supported larger populations. In fact, agricultural practices generally lead to a higher population growth rate because they enable communities to produce more food consistently and support more people. So, in essence, the type of work people do, their way of life, has a significant impact on population trends. Understanding this helps us see how human activity shapes demographic changes over time and ties into the bigger picture of how societies evolve. Let's explore Way of Life 1, which focuses on hunter-gatherers and stable populations. First, their lifestyle was highly mobile, meaning they moved frequently in search of food and resources. This mobility influenced their population dynamics significantly. Because hunting and gathering economies could only support a low child-to-adult ratio, families tended to have fewer children. Additionally, the birth rate was typically quite low and remained fairly consistent over time. This low birth rate was, in part, a natural way of controlling fertility to ensure the population stayed in balance with the available resources. This natural fertility control helped prevent overpopulation. The key point here is that their population size remained relatively stable over generations. This stability contrasts sharply with agricultural societies, which often experienced rapid population growth due to different economic and social factors. So, understanding this way of life helps us see how their mobility and resource constraints shaped their population patterns. All right, let's talk about pastoralism, also known as the herding revolution. This was a major shift in human history, where people began to domesticate animals and herd them for various purposes. When I say domestication, I mean the process of taming wild animals so they can live alongside humans and serve our needs. Pastoralism, in essence, is the herding of domesticated or partially domesticated animals. This was a significant development because it allowed humans to rely on animals for food, clothing, and even transportation. Now, when did this emerge? It appeared somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago, which is roughly the same time as the rise of agriculture. This wasn't a coincidence. These innovations often developed together and transformed human societies. It's interesting to note that, culturally, pastoralism shares more in common with hunting and gathering than with settled farming. It was a mobile way of life, where people moved with their herds rather than staying in one place all year round. So, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, we see the birth of pastoralism, this herding revolution that played a crucial role in shaping human history and our relationship with animals. It's a fascinating example of how humans adapted to their environments and developed new ways of life. The nomadic pastoralist lifestyle was really tough, but it also offered a certain kind of stability over long periods. It's a way of life that's characterized by constant movement, always on the lookout for fresh grazing lands for their herds. Because they needed to find new pastures regularly, they had to keep moving, which made their life inherently wandering and nomadic. This need to move continually meant that their population sizes, both human and livestock, would go up and down depending on the weather. If there was enough rainfall and good grass, populations would grow. When conditions worsened, both human and animal populations would decrease. Despite these challenges, This way of life was remarkably stable over generations. Knowledge about grazing patterns, migration routes, and survival strategies was passed directly from one generation to the next. So, even though it might seem unpredictable or dangerous, this lifestyle was built on a deep understanding of the environment and a resilient way of living that endured over time. Let's talk about where pastoralism developed geographically. First, it tended to emerge on what we might call unimportant land. These are areas that aren't really suitable for farming or crop cultivation. Because they can't support agriculture, they became ideal places for herding animals instead. Next, you'll notice that pastoralism developed in separate regions, distinct from the more fertile areas where farming was possible. This separation helped maintain clear boundaries between herding communities and agricultural ones, which was important for their coexistence. Many of these regions were very dry, often desert or semi-desert areas, where farming was either very difficult or simply impossible. Yet, these harsh environments became perfect for raising animals, as livestock can often survive where crops can't. Lastly, these regions were often located in strategic spots. Their location allowed herders to efficiently graze their animals while keeping a safe distance from farming communities. This separation helped maintain distinct social and economic activities between herders and farmers. Overall, these geographical and environmental factors shaped how and where pastoralism thrived, often in places where agriculture couldn't. This setup was crucial to understanding the development of pastoral societies across different regions. Now, let's look at how mutual dependence and lively trade played a crucial role in shaping early societies. Pastoralism and agriculture, the two main ways of life at the time, actually complemented each other very well. In fact, they were so well matched that many communities became mutually dependent on these different ways of living. Wherever farmers and nomads lived near each other, a vibrant trade would develop. Farmers, for example, offered grain, metal, and man-made objects that they produced. On the other hand, nomads contributed leather, wool, and meat and dairy products from their herds. This exchange created a dynamic relationship, with each group providing what the other lacked. The arrows in the slide symbolize this back and forth, this lively trade that helped both communities thrive. It's a great example of how interconnected societies can be, relying on each other to sustain their ways of life. This mutual dependence was a key factor in the development of more complex social and economic systems, laying the groundwork for further cultural and technological exchanges. Now, let's look at how conflict and warfare started to emerge during this period. As nomadic groups expanded their territories through raiding, they often targeted settled agricultural lands, which were tempting and highly profitable. With their greater mobility, these nomadic raiders could strike quickly and retreat before defenses could be organized. On the other hand, agricultural communities, driven by increasing populations, began moving into new lands, often using force to claim and settle these areas. This push and pull between nomadic raiding and agricultural expansion created a cycle of tension. The most significant development from this ongoing tension was the rise of organized warfare. As these groups sought to defend their interests or expand their territories, organized conflict became more common. This marks a crucial shift toward more structured and strategic forms of conflict, which would shape future societies and their interactions. So, in essence, the interaction between raiding nomads and expanding agriculturalists was a key factor in the emergence of organized warfare, setting the stage for more complex social and political conflicts down the line. All right, let's see how well you understand some key concepts about population and pastoralism with this quick quiz. I'll ask a few true or false questions, and you can think about your answers as I go through them. First, we have the idea that hunting and gathering economies supported a high child-to-adult ratio. Think about how families in those societies relied on every member for survival. Generally, yes, they needed more children to help with tasks and ensure the community's continuity. So, that statement is actually false. Next, did pastoralism emerge before agriculture? This is an interesting one. Historically, pastoralism, which involves herding animals, did appear before farming became widespread. So that statement is true. Moving on, we consider whether pastoral life was tough but stable over long periods. While it's true that pastoralists faced challenges, such as droughts and resource scarcity, their way of life was often quite stable and adapted over centuries. So that statement is true as well. Finally, let's look at whether pastoralism and agriculture were ever mutually dependent. Interestingly, they were often interconnected, with many societies integrating both practices. So, the statement that they were never mutually dependent is false. This quiz highlights some core ideas about how human societies adapted to their environments and how different subsistence strategies evolved. Understanding these points helps us see the bigger picture of human history and cultural development. All right, let's explore this interactive quiz on fill in the blanks. I'll walk you through each statement, highlighting the key concepts and how they connect to our overall theme. First, we see that warfare has much more in common with hunting and gathering lifestyles than with settled agriculture. This points to the idea that early conflicts often involved mobile groups rather than sedentary societies. Next, the necessity to move continually in search of fresh grazing lands made the wandering, nomadic way of life. Nomads had to keep moving to find new resources, which shaped their entire way of life. Then, we have the idea that farmers with grain, metal, and man-made objects would exchange with the pastoralists, who could offer leather, wool, meat, and dairy products. This highlights the important trade relationships that developed between different groups, each specializing in different resources. Finally, warfare began to emerge and became increasingly common to raid settled agricultural lands. This shift shows how conflicts intensified as societies expanded and resources became more contested. Throughout the presentation, we're seeing how these themes of mobility, resource exchange, and conflict are interconnected in shaping early societies. Let's now move into some review questions to deepen our understanding. First, how would you define pastoralism? Think about when it emerged and how it differs from hunting-gathering and agriculture. Specifically, consider the lifestyle and population dynamics associated with each. Next, let's discuss population fluctuation in pastoral societies. What causes their populations to increase or decrease? Also, consider the environmental factors that influence these changes, such as climate or resources. Then, I want you to describe the three main ways early humans depended on lifeways: hunting-gathering, pastoralism, and agriculture. Focus on how each differs in terms of population growth and societal stability. Finally, let's look at interactions between pastoralists and agriculturalists. What are the two main types, trade and conflict? And how did each shape the development of early human societies? Understanding these interactions helps us see the bigger picture of human history and cultural development. So, as we look at the conclusion, we see there are three main ways of life that really shaped early human civilization: hunting and gathering, pastoralism, and agriculture. Each of these methods reflects different approaches to survival, and they had a profound impact on how human societies developed. Hunting and gathering was the earliest way humans sustained themselves, relying on hunting animals and gathering plants. This pattern led to smaller, more mobile populations, with settlements that moved around based on resource availability. Pastoralism, on the other hand, centered around herding and caring for domesticated animals. This approach allowed for somewhat larger populations and more defined settlement areas, but still maintained a level of mobility. It also created new opportunities for trade and social interaction through livestock exchanges. Then we have agriculture, which marked a huge shift. It involved cultivating crops and settling in one place for longer periods. This led to population growth, the development of villages and cities, and more complex societal structures. All three ways of life, hunting-gathering, pastoralism, and agriculture, are fundamentally different in their strategies for survival, but they all played crucial roles in shaping early human population dynamics and social interactions. For example, they influenced population growth rates, settlement patterns, and even economic exchanges. With agriculture, we see the rise of trade networks and organized conflict as societies competed over resources and power. Ultimately, these different lifestyles didn't just help humans survive. They shaped the very fabric of civilizations, influencing how societies organized themselves and interacted over time.